of the more severe physical signs of disordered eating, of an eating disorder, such as drastic change in weight, in losing menstruation. Sometimes there can be a discoloration in our skin. But a lot of the other things to look out for are often very behavioral, of participating in maybe a fad diet that's, eliminating particular food groups. Often what we're seeing is eliminating starches and fats. That's not to say that everybody who diets has an eating disorder or disordered eating, but it's one of the signs that we do look for. More isolation and withdrawal from both family and friends, not wanting to eat with other people, eating more privately. Sometimes you might see some different behaviors that are happening during a meal, that I have to eat my vegetables or protein first. And some real distress if there is a change or not able to follow some of those rules or patterns. We may also see, excusing oneself and disappearing after a meal. We can see eating alone or eating in secret, hiding food, finding wrappers in the room, can be some pretty, definitely can be a sign. And then changes in mood, that seeing an increase in anxiety, depression, and some irritability. Another piece to look at, we're seeing a lot of disordered eating in athletes. So being aware of over-exercise that might be beyond what is kind of prescribed by the coach or the trainer. A pattern of stress fractures can be kind of an indicator that maybe some malnutrition that can definitely be a sign. So there's a lot of signs that we know can look like a lot of other things too, such as anxiety, depression, and just kind of in the world we're living in today, there are a lot of stressors. But I think it's worth asking for some additional support if you do see any of these signs, and not necessarily waiting until we're seeing more of the on the extreme end of some of the physical manifestations. I think what we think of when we hear of an eating disorder is that it is associated with one's body and this desire to be thin. But in reality, most eating disorders may have very little to do with actually wanting to be thin or about our bodies. Oftentimes we see eating disorders as the behaviors become a way to manage or cope with what maybe feels like too much in someone's life. It might be their way of coping with anxiety, depression, or other events that may occur, similar to substance abuse or self-injury, where that is just kind of a product, or it is a symptom of managing maybe a deeper pain. So an eating disorder, although most eating disorders do have some component of body image or maybe a desire to change one's body, that's not always necessarily the case. I would say it's very rare to see somebody with an eating disorder not also have, whether it's anxiety, depression, PTSD. That again, one of the phrases that we often say is that an eating disorder is a way to speak what we don't have the words to say. So it becomes a way to either kind of manage, again, that kind of deeper pain. When we talk about treatment options, there are what we call varying levels of care. The idea is we always want to provide the least restrictive level of care if possible. So that would start with outpatient treatment. Outpatient treatment is typically working with a therapist, somebody who's maybe exhibiting some disordered eating. We would also recommend working with a dietitian to help normalize some of those patterns. That may also include a psychiatrist, as well as a medical doctor, the pediatrician, to be able to monitor medical stability. So to be at an outpatient level of care, the individual would be medically stable and just need some additional support. The next up in the higher level of care would be an intensive outpatient program. That typically involves around 3 hours, 3 hours in duration, 3 to 5 days a week. That's often with other individuals in a bit of a group setting. Again, the individual would still be fairly medically stable, but need some additional support, maybe specifically surrounding mealtime. Then the next level in care would be partial hospitalization programs, which is typically around 5 to 7 days a week, closer to maybe like a 10 to 4. Again, for somebody who is fairly medically stable, being monitored, but needing even more support. And then the most intensive would be an inpatient stay. Inpatient would be if there is any medical monitoring that's required or any concern for the individual's safety. And then for an ongoing, there are residential treatment options, which would involve staying somewhere at a facility for anywhere from 30 days on, where there's more opportunities to intervene and to manage the eating disorder. One other option that would be considered under the outpatient is a lot of families will use what's called family-based treatment, which is where the family, you would work with a therapist and a pediatrician, but they're specialized in training in helping you as a family refeed and focusing primarily on refeeding if there is any concerns with the weight loss. Parenting in general is really challenging, and specifically when you have any mental illness, specifically eating disorders, because it is such a pervasive disorder, and so our culture perpetuates this idea. I think as a parent, first and foremost, I always encourage parents to make sure that you're role modeling and taking care of yourself. So if that means that you have to use your own community, have your own therapist or support system, to make sure that you are taking care of yourself first. That's also showing that you value yourself enough to take the time and energy to take care of yourself. I think we all know you can't give from an empty well. So first and foremost, that's what I always encourage of any parents that I work with. I think specifically with eating disorders, we need to be very cognizant that we are practicing what we preach and what we're trying to encourage our children, which is that we do not need to control our bodies and foods, and that all foods are okay, and not talking in a healthy and not healthy. Trying to avoid good and bad in regards to food or even in bodies. To be able to practice ourselves, taking care of ourselves, but also having some compassion and grace for imperfections. If you have if you have a co-parent, what work can you do to be on the same page so that you can take team, that one of you is really exhausted and needs to step out and let the other parent take over for a period of time. Because the reality is, when there is an eating disorder, we do ask a lot of parents to be there as a support system, to be there as a cheerleader. So it's important that you're able to manage your own stress and overwhelm. So we want to look at more of an overall, yes, we want to take good care of ourselves, of our bodies, and we want to be able to enjoy foods that give us nutrients and that, help build strength. And we want to be able to enjoy food. We want to be able to, food is meant for enjoyment as well, not always for just fuel. And that if we can engage in more of this less black and white, a little bit more of a flow, that then we also have a little bit more control in not necessarily always losing control, that we can also exhibit a little bit more flexibility. That's also how we learn to regulate ourselves. So I think sometimes we can be really afraid that if we give permission that like all foods are okay, I think there's a fear that then we're going to completely lose control and all we're going to do is eat candy for every meal. However, if we actually have allowed children to start to develop and listen to their own bodies and a more of a developing that attunement, we also learn how to moderate. We learn that like, if I do eat too much of this, I get a tummy ache. And so, you know what? I know I'm going to back off of that one a little bit. This is enough. And we want to learn to develop an attunement with our own, you know, hunger and fullness cues. These are choices that give us a lot of energy. These are, you know, it's going to help you. This is going to help you pay attention in class when you're, you know, let's get some protein and fat because that's going to be helpful for us to sustain focus. That this is going to help you, you know, but you know what, you're going to go out on the soccer field, like let's have a peanut butter and jelly because you might need that burst of energy. So I think in general, can we say that we're going to avoid all labeling? No, that would be impossible, right? Adding more impossibility to parenting in general. But if we can, if we can avoid just labeling things, if we can make it more about like, you know what, that ice cream, you know, was really yummy and I hope you enjoyed it. And you know what, we need to get, you know, we need to have some protein too. Like our bodies need protein. So of course you can still provide guidance, right? Because that's what parents do. But if we can do it in less of a black and white way. I think first of all, recovery is absolutely possible. So just because you had some disordered eating or an eating disorder as a, you know, a young adult does not necessarily mean that that's going to be the rest of your life. I think everybody's recovery looks a little bit different. We can't put a timeline or force what that looks like, but I would say absolutely can have a more quote unquote normal relationship with food and life moving forward. Just like all of us, I think we need to be aware of what are our triggers, what makes us more vulnerable to particular, whether it's behaviors, and to be aware of that moving forward. And maybe specifically during times of transition can be a time where we might see like behaviors pop up a little bit again. Because we know that transitions just in general can make us vulnerable, right? We're losing our routine, we're jumping into something new. So that might be a time that we're just like a little extra careful, or maybe we add in a few extra safety nets to take care of ourselves. But I think in terms of what the future looks like, absolutely a fulfilling, great future, just like anyone else.